In the waning years of the Ming Dynasty's founding era, loyalty and betrayal were not simply matters of morality, they were matters of life and death, carried out with blades, fire, and unimaginable cruelty. Xuan, a high-ranking official and governor of Shaanxi, found himself caught in the storm of a bloody succession struggle. His story is one of defiance in the face of tyranny, a man who chose principle over life itself, and in doing so endured a death so brutal that it was designed not just to kill him, but to erase him. His final hours became a macabre display of how absolute power made torture an instrument of both punishment and spectacle in ancient China. Xuan had risen through the ranks during the reign of the Hongwu Emperor, the founder of the Ming Dynasty. He was known for his upright character, sharp intellect, and above all, his unwavering loyalty to the imperial line. When the Hongwu Emperor died, his grandson, the Jianwen Emperor, took the throne. Jianwen's rule was short-lived, however, as his ambitious uncle, Zhu De, launched a violent coup known as the Jingnan Campaign. Zhu De declared himself the rightful heir, raising armies against his nephew and a bloody civil war. Xuan, serving as governor, became one of the most outspoken defenders of the Jianwen Emperor, refusing to bend knee to Zhu De's claim. That refusal sealed his fate. To support Jianwen was to oppose Zhu De. And when Zhu De seized power in 1402 and became the Yongle Emperor, he set about systematically punishing those who had stood against him. Xuan's loyalty to Jianwen was unshakable. Even when Zhu De tried to lure him with promises of rank and wealth, Xuan rejected every offer. His words were bold and dangerous. He declared openly that Zhu De's rule was illegitimate, calling him a traitor who had turned against the rightful emperor. These words, once carried to the ears of Zhu De, were as much a death sentence as the sword itself. But Zhu De did not want a simple execution. To kill Xuan cleanly would be to let him go with dignity, and Zhu De wanted to make him a lesson. For men like Xuan, who embodied loyalty, courage, and defiance, the punishment had to be so extreme that it would terrify others into submission. He was arrested and dragged before the court, his body bound and his head held high despite the threats shouted against him. Witnesses recorded that Xuan stood tall, refusing to bow, his defiance burning like fire even as guards pressed him into the dirt. The tortures began as a way to humiliate him, to strip him of dignity before death. First, his ears and nose were cut from his face. It was said the executioners did this slowly, prolonging the cuts so that each moment was agony. Blood ran down his face, but he did not cry out. The crowd watched in silence, some horrified, others compelled to look away. The mutilation of his face was symbolic, meant to erase his identity, to take away the features that made him human. But Zhu De was not finished. Pieces of Xuan's flesh were cut from his body, cooked, and forced into his mouth. This was no ordinary cruelty. It was an act of ritualized degradation, forcing him to consume himself in front of all. The gesture sent a chilling message. Loyalty to a fallen emperor would not only cost you your life, but would make you complicit in your own destruction. Yet, even as he choked on the burning taste of his own body, Xuan is said to have spat the flesh back out, refusing to yield. His torment did not end there. With his body already broken, his suffering was prolonged. His arms and legs were torn from him, one by one, in a display of deliberate dismemberment. Each limb was severed with precision, his blood pouring onto the execution ground, his voice fading but never begging. Accounts describe his final moments not as those of a broken man, but as those of a martyr whose loyalty remained unshaken even in unspeakable pain. He was torn apart, but his resolve was whole. The execution of Xuan was remembered not only for its cruelty, but for its symbolism. Zhu De wanted him to be an example, but in death, Xuan became something else entirely, a symbol of unyielding loyalty. While his body was destroyed, his legacy could not be silenced. For the Chinese people of his time, and for generations to come, Xuan represented the ultimate sacrifice, a man who gave his life in agony rather than betray his principles. Yet beneath this story of courage lies the darker truth about the nature of power in Imperial China. Torture was not only a means of punishment, but a language of authority. The grotesque spectacle of Xuan's death was staged to instill fear in officials and citizens alike, reminding them of the consequences of disobedience in Jude's mind. The body of Xuan was not just flesh and blood, it was a canvas upon which the empire's authority was painted in blood and pain. The sheer brutality of his death also underscores how deeply politics and violence were intertwined in the era. Loyalty to the wrong man could lead to horrors that defied imagination, and the emperor's power extended not just to the taking of life but to the very manner in which life was taken. Xuan's torment served as a public warning. Submission was survival, and resistance was death. For Xuan himself, however, the choice was simple. To live in compromise was to betray his conscience. To die in agony was to preserve his honor. His story is one of paradox. His enemies sought to erase him, yet their cruelty immortalized him instead. Andrea's ordeal is remembered today because it speaks to the cruel efficiency with which the system operated, leaving behind scars that could never heal. Xuan's name did not fade after his execution. For those who lived under Jude's rule, the memory of his loyalty was whispered even as fear tightened its grip on society. The emperor had wanted Xuan's mutilated body to send a message of terror, but instead it sparked quiet admiration. People spoke of him not as a traitor, but as a martyr, a man who stood taller in death than many could in life. The brutality he endured became part of his legend, transforming him from a defeated official into a symbol of incorruptible integrity. Confucian scholars in later dynasties looked back on Xuan as an example of the Confucian ideal of loyalty, absolute, unyielding, even unto death. In their writings, they framed him as a Zhongchen, a loyal minister, someone who preferred martyrdom to compromise. His suffering, though grotesque, was reinterpreted as a kind of moral triumph. The violence that had been meant to strip him of humanity instead elevated him into a figure of virtue and defiance. Yet the legacy of Xuan is not only about loyalty, it is also about cruelty and the mechanics of power. Jude's methods were not unique. Torture in Imperial China often carried ritualistic elements meant to communicate more than just punishment. Mutilation of the body, forced cannibalism, and prolonged execution were all part of a language of control. It was theater, meant to terrify, to humiliate, and to break not only the victim, but the spirit of those who watched. Xuan's death shows just how calculated this theater was. But the power of torture, as history shows again and again, can turn against those who wield it. By torturing Xuan so savagely, Jude inadvertently ensured that his name would be forever linked with cruelty, while Xuan's name would be remembered with respect. It is a paradox of history. Brutality creates martyrs, and martyrs outlive tyrants. The story of Xuan also invites us to think about the cost of loyalty. Was his sacrifice worth it? From one perspective, his refusal to bend only resulted in his horrific death, while Jude went on to reign as the Yongle Emperor, building the Forbidden City and sending Zheng He on his great voyages. Xuan's resistance did not restore the Zhongwen Emperor, nor did it topple Jude's regime. But from another perspective, Xuan's choice preserves something greater than political victory. It preserved honor. His decisions showed that loyalty, even when it fails in a practical sense, can succeed in leaving behind a moral legacy. Accounts of his death circulated long after the fact, becoming part of China's long cultural memory. In this way, Xuan achieved something that even emperors could not control: immortality through remembrance. Jude may have ruled with force, but Xuan ruled the hearts of those who value principle. His suffering became a lesson taught to later generations about courage, justice, and the price of defiance. Even now, Xuan's execution remains one of the most haunting examples of torture in world history. It was not a moment of random cruelty, but a deliberate attempt to erase resistance through pain. Yet the very extremity of the act ensured that it would be remembered. His ears and nose cut off, his flesh cooked and forced upon him, his limbs torn apart. These details are horrifying, but they endure precisely because they embody the clash between tyranny and loyalty. Xuan's ordeal also resonates in the modern age. While the methods of torture may have changed, the logic behind them often remains the same: to instill fear, to silence opposition, to bend individuals into submission. And yet, history shows us that those who endure torture without surrender often become more powerful in death than their oppressors in life. Xuan is one such example. His body was destroyed, but his spirit remained untouchable. What makes his story even more powerful is its universality. Across cultures and centuries, we find individuals who made similar choices, choosing death over betrayal, suffering over compromise. Xuan's fate echoes in these stories, reminding us of the unbreakable strength of human conviction. He is part of a larger narrative of resistance, one that stretches across time, geography, and empire. In the end, Xuan's legacy forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How far would we go to defend our principles? Would we endure humiliation, mutilation, and death rather than betray our conscience? Or would we bow to survive, knowing survival often comes at the price of dignity? For Xuan, the answer was clear. His choice carved his name into history, not as a victim, but as a symbol of incorruptible loyalty. His torment was meant to destroy him, but instead, it preserved him forever in memory. His body may have been torn apart, but his defiance remained whole. That is why Xuan's story still matters, not only as a grim chapter of ancient Chinese torture, but as a reminder of how courage can outlast cruelty. If this story of unspeakable torture, loyalty, and defiance has resonated with you, remember, there are countless more hidden within history, stories of individuals who faced unimaginable horrors yet refused to yield. By telling them, we ensure their sacrifices are not forgotten. Like, share, and subscribe to Torture's Room for more stories that uncover the darkest truths of human history. Because behind every act of cruelty lies a voice that refused to be silenced, and behind every martyr like Xuan lies a lesson the world still needs to hear.